As the old saying goes, weight classes exist for a reason. And as true as that seems to be, Dwight Muhammad Qawi must have missed the memo. Taking light heavyweight and cruiserweight titles and competing against Hall of Fame heavyweights is incredibly impressive under normal circumstances. But Qawi, billed at 5'7" and most likely a few inches shorter, could have entered the history books just by competing in those weight classes. The Camden Buzzsaw is the shortest pro heavyweight of all time, a distinction he shares with the great Canadian champion Tommy Burns. And just to put that into perspective, that makes him the same height as super flyweight champion Junto Nakatani and shorter than welterweight champion Terence Crawford and the super lightweight champion Devin Haney. But even if he lacked the verticality, Qawi made up for it with pounding combinations, defensive flourish, an excellent chin, and a healthy serving of in-ring swagger, often mocking opponents as they failed to land on their much shorter rival. Regardless of which weight class he fought in, Qawi was always at a height disadvantage. So, he used an inventive mix of offensive and defensive skills to close the gap and connect with thudding, fight-ending combinations. He would use stellar jabs and blatant one-off power shots to close the distance, then fight where he was comfortable at mid and close range. At mid-range, Qawi was a counter-punching specialist with smooth head movement, an unusual guard placement, and a gorgeous jab that seemed to target the back of an opponent's skull. At close range, Qawi would transform into a technical brawler, leveraging his stout and powerful frame to snuff out an opponent's offense and blast through their guard with crushing, tight punches. All of this was paired with an insatiable will to win, a testament that is backed up by his troubled background and unlikely start in the world of boxing. Originally named Dwight Braxton, Qawi grew up in Camden, New Jersey, where a misspent youth led him to a 5-year sentence at a facility which, at the time, had a substantial boxing program. Qawi quickly took to the sport and trained under James Scott, an active light heavyweight contender who fought in televised fights within the prison itself. It's funny to think about what likely happened when some of the inmates tried to pick a fight on who they thought was an easy target. Once a free man, Qawi turned pro at age 25 and began training at Joe Frazier's gym in Philadelphia. With no amateur career or boxing background before 20, this is considered an extremely late start for anyone seriously wanting world stage recognition. But in the same way that odds don't win fights, they can't predict the future. Qawi would go on to win and defend the light heavyweight and cruiserweight titles, engaging in epic bouts with the likes of Evander Holyfield, Zahad Muhammad, and Michael Spinks. He made his heavyweight debut against George Foreman, where he landed a number of skillful, cracking shots that may well have worked against literally anyone else, then went out on his shield. Although he's fighting a much older Foreman, it's interesting to note he lasted longer than Frazier did. Which begs the question, how did this man overcome such large height and reach discrepancies? Scraping by would be one thing, but how did he leave so many comparative giants face down and embarrassed? In my opinion, it all began with expertly tuned head movement that involved a couple of key ingredients. The first being split-second tempo adjustments. I'm talking, of course, about timing. Some fighters choose to react to each and every punch that comes their way, and they slip or roll out of the way depending on the strike. Qawi was totally capable of doing this, but he usually didn't. Instead, he kept a clear line of vision to spot incoming punches, and altered the speed of his bob and weave to make his opponent split the air instead of his face. Since the weave is a circular movement, Qawi could avoid nearly every punch with it by simply speeding up from his previous tempo. For the opponent, this made Qawi's head nearly impossible to time or track. They would try for a home run swing, but the shift in timing acted like a change-up pitch. This was his go-to, but he wasn't beyond using less orthodox tactics, especially if it meant he could showboat. Qawi would reverse shoulder roll, And he would rely on nothing more than the turn of his chin, letting their gloves shave along his whiskers without getting deep enough to cut. Rolling and turning his chin to his weak side, the unusual side, because there's no space left to go if you mess up. As amazing as Qawi's head movement was, he had another tool that literally and figuratively closed the gap. A multifaceted, varied guard. Unlike most fighters, Qawi didn't stick to a single moveset of blocks. Instead, he chose to combine elements of a high guard, cross guard, and Philly shell. And this helped him mitigate size discrepancies because he had an additional layer of defense in any position. It's like walking into battle with a long Roman shield while wearing a bulletproof vest underneath a suit of armor. One of the three is going to keep you safe, even if the others may let something through. Also, pretend it's a video game and you could swap them, like God of War where you can change weapons for different skill sets in an instant. It's the same concept, but a defensive, real-life version. The crossguard covered him from uppercuts and low hooks while weaving. The high guard was ideal for marching through fire while squared up with his opponents. And the Philly shell kept him narrow and ultra-mobile while avoiding punches. All of these set up different counters from their respective positions. You can watch him shift guards immediately after switching positions, just like Kratos. Qawi's style was the opposite of risk-averse, especially while weaving through long combinations and exchanges, so the extra layer of security was necessary to avoid serious damage. There was another secret weapon Qawi used for his guard that helped him to disperse impacts from larger opponents, which was basically all of them. Rather than block with just his gloves, he used his elbows and forearms while blocking, and reinforced these with both arms. In doing so, he framed against serious shocks and supplied a bigger surface area for incoming punches, thus reducing the consequences. If he and his competitor had on old school gloves rather than the heavily patterned modern gloves, Qawi no doubt would have ended up breaking a lot of his opponent's hands. And if you'd like to learn more about all the different kinds of guards and counters, you can check out my book Aggressive Defense, link below. So the man knew how to stay safe. But how did he cover distance against larger opposition so that he can unleash his incredible mid and close range combinations? Well, as is boxing tradition, taller fighters often look to maintain a distance where they can punch, but their shorter opponent cannot. The most common tool for this is, of course, the jab. But unfortunately for Qawi's opponents, he was a master at countering jabs as he pressed forward, crowding them into corners. And he did this using a very similar tactic to the one that Mike Tyson used. When fighting Qawi, boxers already had to punch down, but he compounded the issue by crouching even lower. So, to even attempt to reach their target, opponents tended to overextend, opening their guard and leaning forward. And that's when the Camden buzzsaw would slice through space and leap into counters. He had a number of tried and true staples in his arsenal. He would slip right to load up a cross or an overhand. He would slip inside, rising back up with the jaw-shifting left hook. And he mixed in intercepting counters, slipping left to fire a right punch around the jab at the same time. If you already have all of these in your toolkit and you're looking to add a bit of variety, note how Qawi would slip one way, then weave to the other side to counter from there, adding some unpredictability to his attacks. But when all was said and done, his most impressive and important counterpunch was his phenomenal jab. It was tailored to counter the opponent's jab, and it landed like a piston. But that was mostly due to his impeccable timing. Since Qawi needed to lean and step down while jabbing up, he couldn't really get his momentum moving in the exact same direction as his jab. Jack Dempsey would have been very upset. So instead, Qawi snapped it out like a lightning bolt, catching the opponent just as they committed their full weight into their own jab. For the opponent, the effect was like stepping on a hard leather rake. These were all great mid-range tactics, but all of them could be used to work into close range. Pressed in tight, he'd place his head to stay safe while stuffing his opponent's arms, smothering them like a wet blanket. From there, he would use his height as an advantage, unleashing powerful punches to his opponent's core as if he were trying to chop down a tree. Only when opponents lowered their arms to protect their body could he be bothered to go upstairs. These powerful shots did not come one at a time. He was great at pairing punches, using the first one to create an opening in the opponent's guard so the second one could smash its way through. You wouldn't think that an uppercut would be one of the main tools used by a fighter who's constantly shorter than his opponents, but it was. And not just at close range. He used a tremendous rear uppercut, almost like a smash, but thrown from the other side. Paired with his overhand, it was a powerful tool at mid to long range. And that's how Qawi accomplished things that seemed to be impossible. He had a unique way to control the distance, manipulate tempo, and limit damage. He found a way to not only compete, but capture championships in weight classes the world told him he didn't belong in, and honestly, he probably didn't. He maximized his strength, sturdiness, and resolve while minimizing his weaknesses. He's a fantastic example of how to build a personal fight style without trying to adhere to a cookie-cutter mold for someone who isn't you. As a 5'7" guy myself, I have to say, I look up to him. And read our fight comic, Mortal Weapons. I know it's from a YouTuber, but guys, I swear it's actually really good. From the Modern Martial Artist, this has been David Christian, wishing you happy training.